So first off, what is federalism? It's the system by which power is divided and shared between the federal, state, and local levels of government in the United States. At its core, the federal government has specific powers: the ability to levy taxes, print and regulate money, manage interstate and international commerce, and declare war. States, meanwhile, are responsible for things like building and maintaining roads, overseeing education, keeping police forces, and traditionally healthcare. Of course, there is overlap. Both levels share powers such as taxation, road building, and enforcing the law. The Constitution spells out how this balance works. Article 1 defines the explicit powers of Congress, known as the enumerated powers. It gives Congress authority over taxation, defense, currency, and commerce. Importantly, it also contains the necessary and proper clause, which allows Congress to make laws needed to carry out its enumerated duties. This clause has historically been used as a kind of loophole, broadening federal authority when justified as necessary to fulfill constitutional responsibilities. Article 4 addresses the relationships between states. The full faith and credit clause requires each state to honor the laws, public records, and judicial rulings of the others. This is why a marriage license or driver's license issued in one state is valid in another. Article 4 also guarantees citizens the Privileges and Immunities Clause, which means people traveling to or residing in a different state are entitled to the same treatment and rights as residents of that state. Article 6 introduces the Supremacy Clause, which establishes that the Constitution, federal laws, and treaties are the supreme law of the land. This means that when a state law conflicts with federal law, as long as the federal law is within its constitutional authority, the federal law prevails. Article 6 also requires all federal and state officials to take an oath to uphold the Constitution. Later, the 10th Amendment clarified that any powers not granted to the federal government, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states or the people. For much of American history, the U.S. operated under dual federalism, a system where state and federal powers were distinct and separate. But during Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s, this shifted toward cooperative federalism, where the federal government took a much more active role in state affairs. The main way the federal government exerts this influence is through grants and aid. Categorical grants are the strictest. They spell out exactly how money must be used. For example, Congress might fund school construction, and every dollar must go toward that purpose. These account for nearly 90% of all grants. Block grants are broader. Funds may be given for education, allowing states to decide whether to build schools, raise teacher salaries, or fund new programs, as long as the spending relates to education. These grants often come with conditions of aid. States aren't technically forced to accept them, but since states rely heavily on federal funding, refusal is rare. A famous example occurred in the 1980s when President Ronald Reagan pushed to raise the drinking age from 18 to 21 nationwide. States that refused were threatened with losing all federal highway funding. More recently, the 2019 Tobacco 21 law raised the nationwide purchasing age for tobacco products to 21. Critics argue this intrudes on state power under the 10th Amendment, but supporters point to the Commerce Clause in Article 1, Section 8, which gives Congress authority to regulate interstate commerce. Because tobacco is sold across state lines, Congress justifies its role in regulating it. At one point, the federal government also engaged in general revenue sharing, sending states money with no strings attached, but that practice ended decades ago. Another tool is the federal mandate. Mandates are requirements imposed on states, sometimes with funding, sometimes without. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a well-known example. It required all public buildings to be accessible to people with disabilities. While the law was widely supported, it was an unfunded mandate, leaving states to cover the costs. Federal power has also been tested in court. A landmark case was McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819. Congress had created the Second National Bank, but the Constitution did not explicitly give Congress the power to establish a bank. Maryland attempted to tax the bank, and James McCulloch, a bank cashier, refused to pay. The Supreme Court faced two questions. Could Congress create a national bank, and could states tax it? Chief Justice John Marshall answered both. First, yes, Congress could create a bank under the Necessary and Proper Clause because managing money and commerce made it a necessary means to achieve constitutional ends. Second, no, states could not tax the federal government. Marshall explained, The power to tax involves the power to destroy, and allowing states to tax federal institutions would undermine the supremacy clause. Federalism has both strengths and weaknesses. On the positive side, it gives citizens multiple avenues to engage politically, local, state, and national. The closer government is to the people, the more influence citizens often feel they have. Federalism also allows states to create policies tailored to their unique circumstances. For example, Texas may focus on hurricane preparedness while Colorado prioritizes snowstorm response. On the downside, overlapping powers can create confusion, tension, and lawsuits. States often resent when funding comes with strings attached, or when unfunded mandates force them to shoulder costs. Federalism is a constant balancing act, and debates over where state power ends and federal power begins continue to shape our government today.